right. Then after the product announcements, we had a bunch of iOS updates. We had iOS, Mac OS, Watch OS, iPad OS, all the OS updates. We don't need to get into any of that. But at the end of the presentation, we had one more thing, and it's been long rumored for like probably a decade now. It's finally happened. We got Apple's AR VR headset, the Apple Vision Pro. Finally was announced, finally showed it off, and it's pretty much what we expected. It's it looks like a set of ski goggles, just typical Apple fashion, aluminum frames, a nice comfy headband that has a adjustment dials on the top like the Apple Watch has and like the AirPods Max have. It is a very stylish device. It's a very Apple device. And one question I think we both had going into this, right? Or just about VR in general. For someone to make it mainstream, what is the avenue they're going to take? We've seen most successful VR has been focused on gaming. But as we said, Apple doesn't really have the gaming chops to market it that way, or to make it successful or widely adopted that way. So what is going to be their thing that pushes VR or AR to the next level, or makes everyone want to get their device? And sort of early in the beginning, they said, with Macs, we introduced the world to personal computing. And then with iPhones, we introduced the world to mobile computing. And now with Vision Pro, we are introducing the world to spatial computing. And sort of throughout the entire presentation of this device, that was a term that kept on popping up and they kept on focusing on is this is a spatial computing device. This is a new way to interface with computers. It looks pretty futuristic, and even a lot of the demonstrations that they had is more augmented reality than it was virtual reality, right? It was, okay, you're in your office and your apps are popping up in front of you over your desk or, over your couch. The apps and the screens, they look sort of three-dimensional. Light reflects off of them. They cast shadows. You can expand apps to take up more of your space, less of your space. And one thing that I thought was pretty cool was what they're calling eyesight. Now, someone looking at you wearing a VR headset, they can't see your eyes, they can't see your face. So it's even if you have pass-through mode turned on, let's say, where you can see the outside world on the inside screens, even if you have pass-through mode turned on and you can interact with someone, it's very not jarring. It's very you're very disconnected from the person in the room with you because they can't see you. Mm-hmm. Apple has come up with a solution to that, which they're calling eyesight. And actually, the outside of the device isn't just a piece of glass that houses cameras and sensors and IR blasters and all that. It's actually a screen that will show the person, or that will show people in the room with you, your face essentially. So it looks like it's just a clear piece of glass. They can see your eyes, you can see them, you're looking back at them. But what it's actually doing is projecting your face onto the outside screen, so that when someone walks into the room and they're talking to you and you're talking with them, because it's augmented reality, you're in a pass-through mode, you guys can look each other in the eye and you don't seem as disconnected from the outside world when you're wearing this device. And I think that's a huge problem that they've solved. Yeah. And I think that's going to be a huge reason why, if this does become adopted, let's say, or I was going to say widely adopted, but if it does become more adopted than the Quest, let's say, I think it'll be simply is that when you put this on, you aren't completely disconnected from everyone else in the world around you. And the Quest has pass-through mode, but those people feel disconnected from you, right? And I think it's a small feature, but I think it's a very important feature that more people are going to adopt and more people are going to steal this idea from Apple, because I think it makes a big difference. But from the the introduction of Vision Pro and the demonstration of the different apps and different software. What are your thoughts on their device?
I mean, this is amazing. I was watching this part of the keynote and like the conversation and everything around it when they're like, "Oh, we have one more thing," and every time they showed it, I was more and more impressed. And it's one of those things where we'll get to the price later, but I don't even care. I mean, I think this is just an amazing piece of tech that they made, and I'm kind of surprised by how positive I am on it. As someone who has said many times on this podcast, I don't really care about VR or AR. It's never been something that's really got my attention. PSVR didn't do it, MetaQuest didn't do it. The MetaQuest Pro was as close as it came, but that was more just because of the tech that they were using in terms of the controllers tracking themselves. I thought that was a really cool idea. But this, it's interesting. It's like they ask the questions, or they listen to the questions that everyone has been saying about VR for a long time, VR and AR, but that people have been saying for a long time of like, these are the issues we have with it. When you're in the headset, you're completely disconnected from everything that's happening around you, and it's feeling very isolating, and you can't really have conversations with people. People can't see your face because you have this giant headset on you. It's heavy, the battery life isn't great, it's uncomfortable. Like all of these conversations that people have had with VR, Apple, whether or not they're going to execute, because I don't know if no one's been able to use this thing for a very long time. So we don't know that the answer to all these questions are as good as they seem. But at least it shows that, hey, all these other companies like, Meta, they just announced the Meta Quest 3. And one thing I mentioned in the podcast was I'm kind of disappointed by the design because the Meta Quest Pro went more into the design of being looking less like a VR headset and more like just, a pair of goggles. And then the Meta Quest 3 goes back into looking very much like a VR headset. Um, which isn't like a good thing. You want it to be more organic. You want it to feel a little bit more comfortable, especially if it's something that you're going to be using with people around you with the full color pass through that the Meta Quest 3 now supports. So yeah, this thing, like you mentioned, the small little changes that they made, the eyesight mode, absolutely amazing. And the way you control it is absolutely amazing too. Like you mentioned, there's the digital crown at the top of the headset. And when you turn it, you can either open the environment out to you so it lets the pass through mode in, or you can close it off and you can either put a background or it could just be black. And I think why this is really important is it's not just on or off. You have control over how much of the outside environment you want to see at any point in time with the digital crown, which is really awesome. But then on top of that, it's also really smart. It showed like a situation where someone was doing some work and they were, in the full like blackout mode. And then someone sat next to them and then the headset noticed, hey, someone wants to talk to you. It allowed a small area of the headset to allow for pass through, and it also opened up the eyesight mode so the person could see your eyes, and it did all of this automatically. And it's little things like that that make this really, really impressive. And one thing I noticed with all the marketing material that they used here is that everyone was wearing this all day. Like they never took it off. They like it was just something that they lived with on their face. And right now, that seems a little weird. That seems a little antisocial, a little creepy. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's just something that happens. It's kind of like a cyberpunk kind of future situation where I could very much see a world where everyone is just wearing a headset on them all the time. And this goes back to exactly what I said I've always wanted from AR, having that constant HUD around you with everything that you're doing is just, I don't know. I can't say enough good things about this device. I can't wait to actually see it out in the wild. It will be coming out in 2024, so it's still a ways away. But so far, I am incredibly impressed with the Vision Pro. But how about you? How do you feel about the Vision Pro? How did you feel when you were watching the keynote? Do you think it's as revolutionary as I think it is, or do you think maybe Apple is just taking a small step, and maybe when we get a more mainstream version, that's when we'll start to get really, really excited about what Apple's doing here?
Um, I'm definitely pretty impressed by it too.
Hmm.
I'm definitely impressed, but I'm not. I mean, I'm not surprised it is Apple, right? Everyone expected it to look cool and to look good, but then there are just small things like the eyesight mode, like the pass through mode. There's small little touches where it's like nobody's done it before, and you see it and you see Apple doing it. It's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But the fact that no one's done it before, I think speaks just to how well Apple, I guess researches things or listens to customer feedback around certain things,
Yeah.
not necessarily all things they listen to feedback on. But there's a lot of thoughtful things that Apple does that show in this presentation or that show in this product. For instance, you mentioned you can sort of expand how immersed you are in your stuff, and they've created or what they're calling experiences. They haven't created it, but let's say if you're watching a TV show or you're using an app and you're sitting in your living room, you can open up an experience which is essentially a landscape, right? And the one that they frequently use is, okay, you're sitting by a lake, with mountains off in the distance, and you can use that digital crown to expand how immersive that is. So it could be, okay, there's just this picture behind your app, almost like a desktop background. But then as you turn the digital crown, it becomes more and more encompassing to the point where, okay, yeah, now you're sitting by a lake with, your apps, your screen, whatever in front of you.
Mhm.
Or you're watching a movie and you're sitting by a fireside somewhere out in the woods or something like that. And the fact that they have these immersive landscapes, and as you said, it's not an all or nothing. There's varying degrees of how immersed or unimmersed you are, but no one else has done that before.
Yeah.
And you see it, and it's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, in VR, yeah, why not sit by a lake or sit by the countryside or lay down staring up at the Milky Way. But the fact that no one else has done it, or maybe they're just not marketing it this way, it speaks to Apple's expertise and stuff like this. And then even when it comes down to how you control this thing, so they talked about, okay, the Mac, you use the mouse for input and for control. For the iPod, you use the click wheel. For iPhone, you use multi-touch. With the Vision Pro, you use your eyes, so it's tracking your eyes in order to make selections. And you use your hands, so just gestures with your hands in order to select things. And they had a little jab that, they threw out there. It's you don't have to worry about, using any clunky controllers or cumbersome controllers or anything like that. You just use your hands. And it's like, that makes so much sense. I mean, controllers, if you're playing the game, you definitely need controllers. And that's kind of been the thing with VR too, is it's around video games mostly. And you need controllers, you need different button inputs, you need all of that to play games. But this isn't a gaming device. This is a spatial computing device,
Mhm.
as Apple puts it. And it makes a lot of sense that, yeah, maybe I don't want to have this controller. Yeah, Quest Pro, yeah, the Meta Quest Pro is cool because they have controllers that track themselves. But what's better than a controller that tracks itself is no controller at all, right? Just using your hands. So use your eyes, your hands, your voice. Another cool thing is this is like a built-in 3D camera. So I think in terms of all the cameras that they have, you have like 8 cameras in total, 13 total sensors on the front. You got 2 main cameras, downward cameras to track your hands, side cameras, you got IR illuminators, LiDAR scanners, true depth cameras on the front. So it's a 3D camera and you can use it as a 3D camera or a 3D video recorder, and then you can play experiences back in 3D. Now, one thing that they showed was, okay, hey, maybe you're a parent and your kid is having a birthday party. You can record that in 3D to then later on play back in 3D. So it's not just, okay, just a standard, two-dimensional video. There's depth to it, there's light into it, there's shadows. It's an immersive experience. Kind of reminded me of Minority Report a little bit,
Mhm.
but it's still, the fact that anybody else could have done this,
Yeah.
right? Meta could have done this. I guess really it's Meta. It's what we're talking about. Meta could have done this. I mean, PlayStation, people game on PlayStation, right?
Mhm.
So the fact that they're saying not only is it a VR headset, an headset, it's also a 3D camera that you can use to capture things. And as you mentioned, people out in the wild could start capturing stuff on their Vision Pro headsets and then playing experiences back later on. We talked about the design of it, the single piece of glass, aluminum frame, 3D printed fabric on the back. But what's a cool thing I thought was the headset is fairly modular.
Yeah.
So the aluminum frame on the front, the glass, that's one structure, but then the light sleeve that comes with it, you can swap it out for different sizes or different shapes, I guess, depending on how it fits your face, which is like obviously people have different sized heads, different shaped faces. So it would make sense that it's not okay, just a one size fits all like every other VR or AR headset has been. But it's just like the simple thing of you can swap this out for something else. And not to mention, because it's Apple, I'm sure there's going to be a third party ecosystem for light seals or even the headband on the back you can swap out for different sizes or different shapes or different styles. So I'm sure there'll be a market for that too. But the fact that they understand, hey, not everyone's face is the same size or same shape. So we're gonna make a bunch of variations of this so that you could swap it out and you can make it as comfortable as you want to, as you mentioned, because people are probably or they imagine people are gonna be using this all day long.
Yeah.
Um, I guess one interesting thing too, they kept on talking about spatial audio. That's big marketing thing for Apple with their AirPods, their headphones, with their speakers on their laptops even. And they have these audio pods, which at first I wasn't sure. I was like, are those bone conduction pods that I thought, which would be pretty cool, if Apple was shipping an AR headset with bone conduction as opposed to just regular speakers, but they are in fact regular speakers and they're kind of directed towards your head. But I guess my only question for that is VR headsets in the past that have had speakers, it's usually pretty annoying to the people that are around you in the room with you to have speakers kind of just blaring out whatever you're watching, whatever you're immersed in, whatever you're playing. Now these do look like they're a little bit more directional than typical speakers on a VR headset, but it still is a bit. I don't know. I'm worried about what kind of sound bleed there will be after that. I'm sure that it's of course it's an Apple product, so I'm sure they'll work fine with the AirPods and
Yeah.
the AirPods Pro, and it'll work seamlessly. And then then you can have the transparency mode is tied in with your eyesight mode. But I thought it was an interesting design. But I mean, for VR, I guess it makes sense, right? And I guess they felt this was better than built-in wired headphones, or I would have said a wired headphone option, but they don't even have wired headphones. So I
Yeah.
guess it kind of makes sense that this is how they're doing it. But yeah, it's I'm impressed with all the technology behind it. I think for battery life, they said 2 hours when it's plugged into that external battery pack. So yes, there will be an external battery pack that you I don't know, keep in your pocket or on your hip. If it's plugged in, of course you can use it all day long because that's how plugged in stuff works. The screens, micro OLED displays. I think 64 pixels in the space of a single iPhone pixel is what they said. That's how small they've made their pixels. 23 million pixels across two panels, which is about a 4K display for each eye. Audio, as I mentioned, spatial audio, all the cameras, all the sensors, and they have a new chip that they came out with too. So it actually has two chips. It has an M2 chip, which handles all of the regular processing of the apps, of the software on it, of the different video viewing experiences. But they also have a new chip, which are calling the R1 chip, which I'm guessing is just based off of another Apple ARM chip. But this is meant to process all the inputs from the 12 cameras, the 5 sensors, the 6 microphones. It's meant to process all of that in real time. So it's not like the M2 chip is being bogged down by all this camera input and it's trying to run these apps and it's trying to run these experiences. They've offloaded that onto the R1 chip, which I think is going to be part of why things are going to be so seamless, like when you look at the pass through mode or when you look at the eyesight mode. Um, so yeah, I'm definitely very impressed with it. And as I said, there's a lot of small little things that Apple has done where it's like, oh, that makes sense. I'm surprised no one has done that before. But I mean, that's Apple being Apple, right? They don't always steal features from Android. They come up with stuff too. But I mean, you said we get to the price later on. It's going to cost $3,499, and it will be releasing early next year. So, I mean, like all of the stuff we said, all of the praise, all of the, Raven, not really reviews because we haven't reviewed it yet, but, all of our first impressions aside, what is your thought on the price of it? And I guess how that will affect the product moving forward.
I think the price was necessary, honestly. You mentioned just all the specs of this headset, and then you also mentioned like, hey, there's a lot of little things that they did here that have been talked about, but no one's done. Meta hasn't done. I mean, the hand tracking, HoloLens did that, and I do have a little bit of concerns with things like hand tracking and eye tracking exclusively, and not even having the option for a controller. But other than that, I do agree with you. I think it's a great implementation that it looks like they did here. But the reason why I think the price is absolutely necessary is I think the reason why none of these other companies tackled these issues is the amount of money it would take to tackle these issues. Like when you go over these specs, they're imperative for the features, but they're also outstanding, right? We talked about how the PSVR 2 display was so impressive with 2K per eye. This is 4K per eye. So double what the PSVR 2 did. And then also you mentioned like the micro OLED tech, the cramming as many pixels as possible. Well, that OLED tech is probably what allows you to do there's a partial pass through and a partial locked off mode. Because if it was something like an LCD, which there are some headsets that use LCDs, you can't control every individual pixel like you can with OLED. And if the pixel density isn't good enough, you don't have as much control over how much of the environment you're seeing and how much is blocked off. So going incredibly insane with how much pixel density and how high the resolution of this OLED display is why it probably works so well in terms of showing you the environment around you and also blocking it off. But then on top of that, the eyesight mode, right? That's an extra sort of display that needs to be on the outside of the screen that you as the user is never going to interact with. This is simply just an extra display for the people around you. And why would any other VR or AR headset maker spend the money to put that on something that they necessarily can't put on a spec sheet, or convince a VR enthusiast to get? Like, no one who's playing Half-Life Alyx cares about whether the person across from them can see their eyes or not, right? But that is a huge issue with VR, and it costs money to fix. And there was already a lot of complaints about the MetaQuest Pro, about how much that cost. This is way more expensive than that. And I don't think you're going to get the same complaints because, one, it's Apple. People understand that Apple products are expensive, and people are willing to spend a lot of money on Apple products, much more than they would be on something like a Meta. So Apple can rely on, hey, we're going to have some enthusiasts that are going to pay this price tag. But also, Apple has the money as being the most valuable company in the world and having, very luxury priced products to say, we can afford to tackle all the issues with AR and VR and pass that cost on to the customer. Whereas I think every other headset manufacturer or even something like the PSVR 2, they're probably making very, very slim margins, especially something like the MetaQuest 1 and 2. They were losing money on a lot of those that were being sold before they raised the price, right? So every other company is like, how can we bring this price down as much as possible and keep our margins as slim as possible? Apple doesn't need to think like that. So they don't need to cut corners or, put ugly cameras on the front of it that or put a glossy piece of plastic that scratches easily. No, they can invest in having this nice display, having a full sheet of glass on there so it looks more elegant and nicer. And yeah, I think the price is 100% necessary for that. But I don't know. Do you? Because this is the thing. Like I said, this is the first AR/VR headset that actually got me interested. I think the closest, like I mentioned, PSVR 2, and then also something like the Nreal Air, were probably as close as it came. But this is like leagues ahead of that in terms of my interest. The price doesn't kill the interest for me. I will obviously never own one because I can't afford it. But how do you feel about like what they shown and the price? Did it deflate you at all when they actually announced the price, or were you like, okay, no, that makes sense, or just as excited? Because honestly, this price is even higher than what the price was rumored to be.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious to get your impression on like what you felt like when you saw the price.
So I'm not gonna say it deflated me because, as you said, we did expect it to be high. I think the rumors were $3,000
Yeah.
floating around there. So I think I more like laughed when I saw that it was $3,500, just because, like, as you said, Apple premium, people are prepared to pay a premium for Apple products. Some good alliteration there. But I mean, I wasn't planning to get one anyways. So it didn't really like, oh man, I thought I was gonna be able to afford it. No, I knew there's no delusions there. I knew that I wasn't going to buy this thing. But you brought up a good point. There is a lot of good technology in here and a lot of expensive technology in here that is just naturally gonna bring the price up.
Hmm.
And as you said, because it's Apple, they don't have to worry about, okay, we're gonna, put this together and we're gonna be selling at a profit. No, they're gonna be like, all right, people know that our stuff is expensive, so we're gonna pass on the expenses to the consumer, to the early adopters. And I'm sure that as the years go on and as VR technology becomes more affordable, then yeah, okay, the price will drop then. But I would agree with you. I think it's justified in a way. And they brought this up in their presentation, which okay, yeah, great marketing way to, they're giving me my talking points. But it's like if you look at the 4K screens that you get and you look at the speakers that you get and the fact that okay, yeah, this is running an M2 chip. And if you look at MacBook Air, right, with M2 starts at $1,100. So even just for the process, just for the computer side of this product, it'd be $1,100
Hmm.
to start, right? Not to mention a 4K screen. And they were saying, okay, if you want to get like a 60-inch TV screen and a surround sound system and a Mac computer and, however many high definition 3D cameras that you're getting with this thing, it's going to be more than $3,500. So if you look at the fact that it's not just, a video game console, that's not what they're marketing it as. It's spatial computing once again, but it's a computer, it's an entertainment system, it's a video conference system. It's a lot of things all in one. And with all of the technology that they've packed into it, yeah, $3,500 doesn't seem crazy. But do I think it's going to be widely adopted? No, definitely not at $3,500 because maybe spatial computing is the future, but we're not in the future right now,
Hmm.
right? Maybe you might have people wearing this out on the road, maybe you wearing this on public transit. Maybe, probably not, especially if it's $3,500.
Yeah.
I feel like people aren't going to be walking around with a $3,500 device on their head. We scoffed at how expensive the AirPod Maxes were, even though we knew, okay, yeah, how much? Like $700. People are going to buy it anyways. 3,500 is a lot more than 700.
Yeah.
So I'm I'm not surprised by the price, but I also don't think it's going to be widely adopted at this price. I think, hopefully by the third generation, the prices come down a bit and then you see people adopting it a lot more. But I think until the price comes down, we're not going to see this in a lot of places. Yes, you can go, you'll probably be able to go to Apple stores soon and experience it. You'll be able to maybe even go to like a Best Buy or something and experience it there. But I think until the price comes down considerably, you're not going to see very many people out and about with these headsets. Sorry, AirPods Max, $550. So yeah, $3,500, 550, bit of a difference.
Yeah, get both. Just spend 4,000. You got both. You're ready to go.
I don't think you can even use them together.
Oh well, I imagine you can, because they did show video of people using AirPods.
But
On
I
a
don't think it
plane.
would fit over it.
Maybe, yeah. Well, so that's the thing though. With this headset, it's expensive, but I wouldn't be surprised. I've never seen a Meta Quest Pro in person. I wouldn't be surprised if I end up seeing one of these the moment they come out. Like, I'm sure people are going to stretch to get this just because of how cool and futuristic it looks, and people are going to want it. But I have two kind of questions for you that are related to some issues I have with the device. One I'll mention quickly. This device will have a fan that they mentioned, and there's a little vent right. It seems like it's right under or right over your right cheek. And I wonder if it could potentially get uncomfortable after a while if there's like warm air blowing, because this is a pretty small device. It's powered by an M2 chip, and we have heard people talk about how the MacBook Air with the M2 chip can get a little bit warm, and this is even smaller than that. So that's something, but that doesn't have a fan. So that's something I'm a little bit worried about, but that's just hardware stuff. They'll fix that over time. There's some kind of social stuff that kind of I don't know if I'm on board with yet. And one of them is the idea of wearing something like this all day long. There's so much videos that Apple put out of like people interacting with their kids while wearing this headset. And even with eyesight mode, it's still obstructing a large part of your face. It's still a pretty big thing. Like you mentioned, it's like wearing ski goggles all the time. Do you think, based on what Apple's shown here, and like I said, I'm 100% on board with what their vision is, but do you think that they have proven with this device that the future we're going to be in headsets all the time? Because we were just talking about with the Meta Quest 3, how we thought that VR and AR was not really going anywhere, and it was not necessarily done, but not going to hit the mainstream with the way that things were moving. Did this device change that for you? Can you see in maybe the next 5 years we're all walking around with vision headsets instead of iPhones, or with our iPhones?
No, I don't see it. I still think, and maybe I just ignored these parts in the video, but most of it was being used either at home or in an office, right? I mean, obviously, this is the very first time they're showing it, but they didn't show any two people in the same room using it. It was always, okay, as you said, here's a parent with their kids. Here's, someone having a virtual meeting. Here's someone sitting alone on their couch watching something. So I still don't see this being used outside by a large amount of people. I mean, as you said, there's people who are going to buy it. I'm sure there's going to be people who buy it, don't have it powered on, or just wearing it on their heads just as like a fashion thing. I could even see fashion companies copying the design of this and making actual like ski goggles and making actual glasses, or I guess, I don't know, visors that look like this for people to walk around in. I'd probably wear a pair of these if they were actually like sunglasses.
Yeah.
Right. But I still think VR is as much as the pass through, as much as the eyesight, it's still a very, it's something that secludes you from the rest of the world.
Isolating.
Or that cuts you up or isolates you from the rest of the world. And yes, pass through mode helps with that. Yes, eyesight helps with that. But it still isolates you from the rest of the world. That's, in essence, what the device is. So I guess, yeah, it's like a roundabout way. I don't see people using this out in the open every day in 5 years. I think by the time VR does become widely adopted, if this does become widely adopted, it's just going to lead to people being at home more often because they don't need to go out in the open,
Mm,
right? Like all your work is going to be done on this. You'll be able to attend classes, lectures on this. You'll be able to interact with your friends on this. You'll be able to go to the movies on this.
yeah.
You know, you can Uber Eats anyway. You don't need to go out for food. So
It,
yeah,
it's
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 yeah.
funny that you mentioned that because I remember right before our last podcast yesterday, I was mentioning I was watching Star Wars Visions, and they did bring out Bob Iger on the stage to talk about how hey Disney Plus is going to be usable on this device from day one, which is kind of cool. And maybe they're going to try to make some exclusive experience for the Apple Vision Pro. But the one thing I did mention is I wish that first episode I could have watched that first episode of Star Wars Visions in a movie theater, just because of how good it looked. And immediately when I saw them like watching Disney Plus on this thing with like a giant screen in front of them and like great sound and all that, I was like, oh man, yeah, I would absolutely want this in my house. And it goes to your point of like, yeah, if you can't uh, factor in the price of a PC and 4K screens and all this stuff, and that's something I would be like, yeah, I would absolutely love to use this as like my main monitor or my main display or my main computer. The problem is I'm the only one that can use it. So I can't watch something with someone else with this. We would both have to have one, which is a little interesting. And it also brings up a fact that they didn't mention in at all anywhere is what the refresh rate of these screens are. You're hoping that the refresh rate is going to be really fast because with VR content, if it's running at 60 hertz or less, you can get very sick, nauseous, a lot of people. And the faster the screens, the better at mitigating that factor. So hopefully, they didn't spare any expense there as well, but they didn't mention it. But then I guess my final question about this product is this is the Vision Pro headset. Tim Cook, he wants this to be his flagship kind of piece of tech, kind of like how Steve Jobs was with the iPhone. He wants this to be his iPhone. And in order for that to happen, it definitely has to become a little bit more mainstream than it is. I still think it can be more expensive than the competition, but not to this degree. What do you think they need to cut in order to make the Vision non-pro version of this headset? And do you think they can afford to cut things like eyesight mode or the 4K screens, maybe going down to 2K per eye, like the PlayStation VR headset, to make a cheaper version that's non-pro? Or do you think they just have to wait until this tech becomes cheaper and kind of just make this device cheaper once that's even possible? Like, do you foresee a Vision non-pro coming next year at all?
Not next year. I mean, sticking with my timeline, I would say year 3,
Mm-hmm.
the Vision Non Pro comes out, or I don't know, maybe the Vision SE.
Yeah.
And I think at that point it would have to be strictly an AR headset.
Mm.
I think that'd be a great way to cut costs. I'm not sure how they would do that exactly, but I would say strictly an AR headset, and then you could cut out some of the sensors. You could cut out, probably even at that point, okay, maybe 3 years in, we don't need as many sensors. We don't need as many cameras. Maybe some of the cameras that we've added are a bit redundant. Maybe take out some microphones, and then maybe instead of having, eyesight mode, because they are AR glasses, it's there isn't anything really obstructing your eyesight at
Mm-hmm.
that point. So people can actually see your eyes, and you can actually see them instead of having a pass through mode. You can just look through the glass, look through the screen, and see people. I think that could be widely adopted, and especially if it comes in at a much more reasonable price, around $1,000, or around whatever the price an iPhone is at that point. I think I guess iPhone Pro is at that point. I think that would be widely adopted. Yeah, but I guess from you, what do you think would need to be cut, or I guess what features would you still want? And you've said you're not interested in VR, but definitely in having a heads up display and having AR glasses. That's something that might interest you. So from your perspective, what features would you want to see on a Vision SE? And then later on you can get to the price, but what features would you like to see from a Vision SC that would say, you know what, actually, I'm interested in this product. I think this could be adopted.
Honestly, I think for me it's eyesight. Um, Even if like yes, like you mentioned, they could do a full AR kind of set of glasses, kind of something like the Nreal Air and stuff like that. But one thing I'm really impressed by is how all of this stuff works together in terms of being able to completely block out your surroundings, but also being able to have that pass through. And I think something like eyesight fixes that big problem between AR and VR. I think it brings both of those together in a way that I don't necessarily need uh, AR if eyesight works as well as they shown in this kind of press. So I would love to see that feature stay. The one thing I would say you can absolutely cut would be something like the display resolution. I think you can go down to 2K per eye, and yeah, sure, that might affect how much control you have over blocking out the outside your outside environment. Maybe you don't get as much degree of customization of how much you're blocking out and how much you're letting in, but I still think that that would be an awesome way to cut the cost. uh, but going forward, I think if they stick with this kind of design, I would hope that we can get the technology to make it slimmer and less bulky, simply because, you know, one thing we didn't talk about but is really impressive with this is that no other headset does, is it sounds like you're getting a full 180-degree view of these displays. Generally, most headsets you get around 110 to 120 degrees, but this you get your full peripheral vision, which I think helps with that idea of feeling more like an AR headset, even if it is fully closed off. But yeah, I would really love to see it getting smaller because, you know, I asked you that question about people wearing this and interacting with their family and stuff like that. To me, it still seems a little creepy.
Mhm.
As positive as I am on this headset, it still seems a little weird. And I think the less bulky and the less noticeable this gets, the less weird it would get to interact with people while you're wearing it. So yeah, I think some of those features I would love to see them stay, but the display resolution I think is probably where they can cut the cost the most. And for how much I would hope it would cost, I don't know. I think we're at the point now where VR headsets, especially all integrated models, because we're seeing what $500 gets you with the Quest, and like I said in the podcast, didn't excite me. It might just be a situation where headsets just need to be $1,500 to $2,000 going forward, until there's something like really interesting. And the only other way I could see that getting a little bit cheaper is maybe if there's no inside processing. If, you know, we see that the battery is external, and we talked about this on the podcast in the past, I would love to see the processing be external with that battery, and maybe you can sell the headset and the processing separate so people can budget a little bit easier. And, you know, maybe you can buy processing secondhand, and then when you want to upgrade, you don't need to buy the whole package. You could just buy that one piece. I don't think Apple will ever do that because obviously they like their money. But yeah, maybe that's a way that they can kind of lower the price, kind of like what PSVR does. You know, you pay extra for the PlayStation 5 and then you get the headset separate. But I don't know. I think it's going to be an expensive piece of tech, maybe for at least the next decade or so. But how about you? What is the price that you're hoping these things hit in the future?
I say the price of an iPhone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's good. That's a
Yeah.
good point.
Like what the 14 Pro starts at starts at $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
The Pro Max starts at 1,100. So I would, and this is okay, if it is going to be widely adopted,
Yeah.
I'd say $1,100, right? I'd say anything too much more than that, especially because okay, $1,100 gets you a Pro Max, $1,100 gets you an iPad Air, or not iPad, MacBook Air, and you had 13-inch iPad Pro, $1,100, right? So $1,100 gets you 13-inch iPad Pro, 13-inch MacBook Air, or iPhone Pro Max. I'd say $1,100 for the Vision SE, and that's
Mm-hmm.
if it's going to be widely adopted. I think anything more than that, and you're not going to see it. I mean, assuming those prices stay the same. Let's say if iPhone prices and everything else jumps up to $1,300, you know, and let's say we're talking about 3 to 5 years from now, if it jumps up to $1,300, then yeah, I think people would be okay spending $1,300 for the Vision SE headset.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think as long as you stay above that, that's it's asking a lot from people. Especially, okay, if we look at the MacBook Pros, for instance, right? The 14-inch MacBook Pro starts at it starts at $2,000. So I think it has to be less than the 14-inch MacBook Pro, and it's obviously going to be more than a iPhone Pro Max. So between those two ranges, whatever they happen to be in the future, that will be widely adopted.
Yeah.
But if it's more than a 14-inch MacBook Pro, not going to happen, in my opinion.
Well, there's also the possibility, iPhones, Apple Watches, these are sold subsidized through carriers. There's also an absolute opportunity that we could see headsets like this sold subsidized through carriers with like 4G support and stuff like that. So when it does get to the point where you could wear these on the go, whether it's AR or VR, you're actually always connected to the internet, which would subsidize the cost there too. You're just paying a monthly fee. So yeah, who knows? It remains to be seen if this becomes Tim Cook's iPhone. But I don't know. I gotta say, I'm really impressed by what they've shown so far.
Yeah, definitely impressed. Looking forward to seeing some hands-on reviews eventually.
Yes.
Not anytime soon, but yeah, just take it easy, everyone in podcast land.
Catch you in the next episode.